We need to talk about this. I know that it's uncomfortable. I know that that's really scary. But if you don't want Andrew Tate radicalizing your child, then we need to talk about this. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. And today we're talking about some real weird alpha male bullshit because we have talked about alpha male stuff in the past, and I, in full disclosure, went to go look at some really bad alpha male dating advice so we could talk about that again, except that this time things got real weird. We slid down the alpha male pipeline in a damn hurry. And so I want to talk to you guys about that because things got real dark, actually, like darker than I expected. So I want to take you guys on that journey and talk about how we ended up there, and also talk you through some of my very serious concerns, actually, about the fucked up shit that's happening on the internet. So let's do that. Okay, so let's start from the beginning because, like I said, I went to go look for some of this content to talk to you guys about it, except that this time I decided to make a new account so as to not fuck my algorithm up. But things got real weird real fast. The thing that I noticed, first of all, is that without even searching anything, TikTok in particular was giving me a lot of obviously teenage boy content, which I gave it no indication that I was a teenage boy. We'll talk. Eventually, at one point later, I made a second new account. It was a whole thing. But initially, I did not give it any indication that I was a teenage boy, but it was giving me a lot of that content. So there was weird AI-generated bullshit. There was also a lot of, like, teenage boy gamer content.
I finally obtained this jewel. My Robux better not go to waste. I graciously planted the seed and then oiled it up like there was no tomorrow.
Which I was confused by because, again, I gave it no indication that I wanted to watch these things. And then there were a couple of, like, comedy skit style videos that were things like, you know, we hate teachers and how they give us homework, right? Girls at school be like kind of things. Other sort of, like, vaguely comedy-esque style videos that were obviously made by teenagers and were intended for a teenage audience. I'll show you some of that right now as well.
So she can't participate in gym today because her stomach hurts really bad.
And also she has to walk me to the nurse because I get lost. So we have to go.
So the thing about this is that there were vague undertones of sexism in some of this, especially like the, you know, girls in PE kind of thing. That was a little bit like, ugh, but there was nothing outwardly obviously heinous about this content. It was the level of misogyny that I would expect from teenage boys, quite frankly. Not anything like particularly violent at this stage, but we slid downhill super fast. There were a couple of things that started more subtly, but were still certainly more misogynistic than the previous content that I showed you, like this video.
Oh my God, yes. Just checking on you. Stop checking on me and go check on the stove. That shit ain't got no food on it. Get out, Mom, please. Please.
And then the thing that I noticed is that pretty quickly, this turned into overtly sexual content, like sexually explicit content. I'll show you some of that. I'll probably just put it up on the screen because there's not really any audio with that. So I'll put that here and here. There were very obviously sexual or sexually explicit videos that were being put on my For You page that I, again, gave it no any indication that I wanted to watch this content, had not engaged with any content at this point. And so I was like, honestly kind of taken aback. I'm not a prude by any means, but especially given that it was feeding me content that seemed intended for teenagers, I was a little bit confused and like honestly kind of shocked that it gave me this content. So I decided at this point, like, we're gonna sort of follow this and see where this goes because this is fucking weird. The other thing about this that was troubling to me, this content didn't necessarily say like, you should hate women, right? But there was something very dehumanizing about it. And I think especially knowing that the audience seemed to be young men, adolescent men, teenage boys, the attitudes in this were upsetting to me because knowing how the adolescent brain engages with content like this, I was concerned. If you're not aware, adolescent brains, teenage brains, they're very malleable, right? They're very like flexible and they're very impressionable. I don't know that that's like necessarily news to anybody, but being young means that your brain is very susceptible to things like indoctrination and brainwashing. And so seeing this content show up on a very popular social media platform was like, it's a little concerning to me because the question for me was like, what are these children essentially absorbing as a value from content like this, which to me seemed like possibly a lot of dehumanization, for sure some misogyny in there, and also stuff that was just not appropriate, quite frankly, for children of this age. For what it's worth, also, this is why, like, For example, religious indoctrination is especially dangerous for children who grow up in those environments, and cult indoctrination is especially dangerous for children who grow up in those environments because brains are very impressionable. So when we're subjected or exposed to that kind of material very young, our brain just kind of latches on to those values and beliefs, even if they're subconscious or, covert. And that becomes the way that we view the world at large. We walk around having absorbed those values and beliefs. So being exposed to stuff like this is concerning about what those children might grow up to think and believe about the world around them. Speaking of indoctrination, by the way, the other thing I noticed is that after that content showed up, it did not take long at all for the Matt Walshes of the world.
A choice between an attractive, sweet, kind, feminine grocery store cashier who makes $13 an hour and wants nothing more than to become a mother one day, or a high-powered, ambitious, loud, rich, corporate girl boss whose greatest dream is to be a CEO one day. Most men, I'm telling you, will choose the former without hesitation.
Brittany Dawn's Turning Point USA.
And so we have told young women through this hyper-feminist model, go act like men, and a lot of people end up severely depressed. So all that to say, we need more strong biblical men that have their act together to actually get involved in young men's lives, and women, for the love of everything holy and good, stop giving your body away to every man that wants it and save yourself for marriage.
All of that started to show up as well. I was also watching YouTube Shorts alongside this, by the way. I was sort of switching back and forth. RIP to my algorithm on YouTube Shorts because I did not make a new account there. But it started feeding me weird pick-me content as well. I'll show you this video. There's a lot of content from this creator that is like egregious in my opinion, but we don't have time to get into all of that, so I'll show you that video.
Is the biggest cause of children and child abuse stepfathers? What does that tell you about who's the danger to children? It's single mothers.
So the thing about this is that, first of all, gross, but second of all, that we're clearly moving down a pipeline here, right? We started with teenage boy content and moved into sort of veiled sexism, which turned into dehumanization and outright misogyny, and now we've reached the phase of the pipeline where we're exposing to children overt political beliefs that come alongside this foregone conclusion of misogyny and sexism, right? The thing about this is that we are very obviously continuing to escalate the extremism that's in this content. And I want to be clear, right? This didn't happen over the span of 10 minutes. It's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I was on TikTok for like a hot minute, which, by the way, some of these videos might not have audio. Some of them might be altered or changed because OBS hates me and we lost like hours of footage. So I had to go back and sort of unfuck the thing. Some of them might be weird. That's why. But it took a while for us to get to this point. But quite honestly, it took less time than I thought it would. I figured that this would be over the course of like months, even a year. But I gradually over time, it took probably a couple hours in total. I looked through content over the course of a couple of weeks using the same TikTok account. And again, we slid downhill into overt political takes and like extremism in that amount of time, maybe 3 weeks. Which again, I want to highlight how malleable, how impressionable young brains are, because we don't necessarily have definitive research that establishes a causal link between manosphere type stuff and violent behavior towards women, but we do have correlational research that seems to paint that picture, as well as like a heap of self-report data, situational data that does seem to tie those things together. Teachers and parents in particular report that young men who consume manosphere type content are the ones who seem to be most often verbally and physically violent towards their peers, specifically female peers, obviously. Actually, I did look at quite a bit of research in this video. Once I realized what was going on, I looked at quite a bit of research here, and I wanted to share a quote with you guys that is awful. There was one teacher that reported hearing a student say, "I wouldn't even rape you," to a female peer. And there was another teacher who stated that there was a male student who out loud said, "It's okay to hurt women because Andrew Tate said so." So again, we don't necessarily have definitive like randomized control trial research to support a causal link there, but we do have a lot of data and a lot of correlational or a lot of research that establishes a relationship there between those two things. Okay, so at this point, like we're fully just off the deep end. I wanted to see what would happen if I like push the algorithm to show me even more fucked up like stuff, what's happening here, right? So I typed into the search on the TikTok account. At this point, it was the second TikTok account, dating advice. And the videos that came up were horrifying. I'll show you those in a second. Really quick, as an addendum though, I want to share with you guys, I had to make 2 TikTok accounts because the first one, listen, this sounds This sounds like conspiracy theory, cuckoo banana stuff, and it might be, right? I'm paranoid. I am fanatic about my privacy. We all know this. So I had to make a second TikTok account because the first one, when I made the account, obviously I didn't intend to make this video in this way. So it just had my name, because it does the thing where it links your name from your email, right? So it just had my name and then a bunch of numbers. And I also had left my camera little flappy on my webcam open, right? The thing that happens when you use OBS is that, or at least my OBS, is that it turns your webcam on because it tries to pull the camera feed, whatever, right? I left the little privacy flap on my webcam open because I was like, I'm not using the camera, so it doesn't matter, right? But over the course of probably 2 weeks that I was using this TikTok account to look at this content, it started to funnel me down this pipeline. And then all of a sudden, it started feeding me girly pop content. The thing that I noticed is that it started feeding me content actually that was the same content creators that I had followed and liked and engaged with their content on my phone that are like small content creators. These are people that are not in like the millions. They're like micro influencers that I personally engaged with their content on my private TikTok account. And I couldn't get it to stop doing that. It was like all of a sudden the content was completely different. There was no more of the content that I had engaged with before. And I was super freaked out by this. So I disconnected the camera feed from my OBS. I closed the camera flap on my webcam and I made a new TikTok account with a different name. I think it was like Jeremy is the coolest or something was the account name. And then it kept feeding me the like alt-right alpha male pipeline kind of stuff. So as an addendum, I wanted to include that because again, I had to make 2 TikTok accounts. And so in, the sake of transparency, I wanted to be honest about that. And that I do feel like there's some hinky stuff going on in the way that TikTok surveils our, activity on the platform. So for what it's worth, I by no means, let's be clear about this, I don't agree with the idea of a TikTok ban. And be careful with your own privacy because I was like super weirded out when that happened. So anyways, I had to make a second TikTok account. And this is where I started looking up dating advice stuff. And the videos that came up, horrifying. There were some of the classics like bad alpha male sex advice, which I'm going to be clear, I would put dating advice in the search and it gave me sex advice. Whatever. And I have talked about some of that content on the channel before. We had some stuff like this.
When you're dominant and you're leading and you're sort of being a bit maybe more like manhandly, it puts a woman in this subspace where she's not thinking anymore. She's just being present.
So if someone's literally sat around all day masturbating 2, 3, 4 times, they actually become more feminine. Completely. That is biologically a fact.
She has no idea, no clue what to do. Well, how about a virgin that's learned a lot through reading and studying and wants to try it out? That would be ideal.
You get laid 10 times more when you adopt the mindset that sex is a reward for her and not for you.
But there were also some real spooky videos that encouraged actually abusive behavior.
If you want to punish a woman, the best way isn't by turning her into a punching bag. No. If a woman starts ignoring you, your initial reaction might be frustration, but it's crucial not to act like a spoiled brat. Don't let her drag you into an emotional outburst, because that's exactly what she wants.
Never under any circumstances let a woman know that you are in love with her.
Attention is currency when it comes to a woman. If I am getting messages that are paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs long from a girl that's mad at me, I know that she loves me.
And that turned into like actually violent sexual and relationship advice. We started with content that was just mocking femininity, right? And was misogynistic in this sort of undertoned way, in the way that like the whole world is misogynistic, really. But that became some pretty derisive takes about like gender roles and things. And that turned into very dehumanizing, sexually explicit content about women. And then that turned into overt political propaganda, very obviously misogynistic takes, which then turned into very obviously and aggressively, very loud violent content and the encouragement to be violent and abusive towards women. It's a pipeline, right? Welcome to the Manosphere. We've arrived, right? That was the thing that was really concerning to me about it, is that it took very little time and almost no effort to arrive in the heart of the Manosphere. At this point, I want to talk about a book which is called The New Age of Sexism, How AI and Emerging Technologies Are Reinventing Misogyny, which I have only been able to consume snippets of because unfortunately the audiobook is not available in the United States yet, and I cannot read a paper book to save my life. If I forced myself to read the paper book before I made this video, you'd never get the video. So Laura Bates is the author's name, and she talks about how AI generally is creating a real problem in the way that men view women because it is easier than ever, it is more accessible than ever to find content that dehumanizes women and also endorses violence against women in a very personal way, too. This is the thing with like deep fakes, with AI, like large language model girlfriends, right? Digital girlfriends. All of those things are becoming like commonly recommended pieces of content or, digital engagement for men, especially men who have slid down this pipeline. And it starts the process or cements the process for men to not respect women, not value women, and also not care about the well-being of like their fellow human, but especially about women, and also celebrates this idea where they're delighting in the suffering of women and the abuse of women, which is an incredibly scary thing to talk about when viewing this through the lens of an adolescent or teenage boy. Because again, I want to bring us back to the point that when we are teenagers and we're young people, we are still forming our views about the world at large. We're figuring out our identity, how we fit into the world, what that means about the people around us, and how we engage with those people. So when we're exposing teenagers to content that dehumanizes women, that glorifies the abuse of women, and delights in the suffering of women, it is entirely possible, probable even, that those people can grow up to be adult men who view women in this very dehumanized and abusive way, who then seek out opportunities to be physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually violent towards women, which is creating a real problem. We're going to talk about the mental health impact of that in a minute. Again, I think it's obvious that this content is potentially going to change the way that young men view and interact with women for their whole lives. But the thing that's particularly scary about this to me is that teenagers and like adolescents is an already particularly emotionally overwhelming time, right? Obviously, we all remember how much that sucked and how, especially now, it's fairly common for teenagers to experience mental illness and self-esteem deficits and anxiety and a lot of difficult things to deal with, right? And so the Manosphere takes those very emotionally and developmentally common issues with things like embarrassment, right? Disappointment, anxiety about fitting in with our peers, and a desire to be approved of, to be seen and valued. And also, particularly for adolescent men, a shame about rejection, either perceived or actual, and turns it into vitriol and hatred and violence and anger, and tells young men that the way that you deal with these emotions that you're experiencing is by becoming an abusive person. And in fact, the reason that you're experiencing these emotions is because women are bitches, women hate you, they'll never respect you, and the only way to have successful relationships is to dehumanize them, to treat them like garbage, to be abusive and violent towards them, and to take no feedback about these emotions, these opinions, these beliefs, and just plow forward, keeping this perspective, this orientation towards people at the forefront of your personality and your identity. This is obviously an incredibly scary thing to do. And I think the other thing about this that is worth analyzing is the timing of it all, right? Because social and political and personal trends, I guess, not that this is a trend, you get what I'm saying. These things don't exist in a vacuum, right? Men and young men and teenage boys are not being exposed to this content just as a whoopsie poopsie. I do think it's worth exploring the way that that correlates with our political and social issues that are coming up right now, right? We've talked a lot on the channel. We've talked a lot about it on the pod as well. If you haven't watched the pod, link in description, it's great, about political propaganda, digital propaganda, and especially the way that our algorithms are being exploited to expose us to content that causes us to fall down pipelines, particularly of the alt-right persuasion, and that this seems like a potentially very convenient or helpful vehicle for folks who have a vested interest in a new generation of people being radicalized into extremely fringe conservative beliefs, right? So all of that sort of wrapped up into one large package, I think it paints a very scary picture about the future of these young people, and especially what we know, right? Like factually, the Gen Z generation of young men skewed a lot further conservative in our most recent election than they have in a very long time, which is typically not the way that it works. Generally speaking, the youngest generation is going to be the most progressive. And so that was very noteworthy, right? Again, analyzing these two things together is worth doing, in my opinion, because like, where is this content coming from, right? Where is this content originating from? Why is it being served to these people? And how on earth did this happen so quickly? That was the thing that really got me, is that I didn't have to search for it. I didn't have to look for it. It did not take any time at all. And this is one of the things that Laura Bates talks about in her book.
On average, when you set up a new TikTok account in the name of a teenage boy, it takes just 30 minutes before the first piece of extreme misogynistic content will be promoted to that account.
That's incredibly concerning. She talks in her book as well about incel parts of the internet and the rhetoric there, and how that, first of all, is correlated with hopelessness and depression, but also is becoming more fused with mainstream content in algorithms that are directed at young men. I also wanted to talk about the correlation that exists between this very obviously misogynistic content and racism, homophobia, xenophobia, because those all seem to kind of belong in the same, or not belong, but they seem to sort of go together in these same content niches, and research seems to support this correlation as well. It is most common for content creators who peddle this very alt-right, misogynistic, violent content to also have a pretty strong association with things like racism and homophobia and xenophobia. And obviously, first of all, that sucks. But second of all, this is incredibly harmful to people's mental health. We're going to talk about the mental health impact of this on the victims of this, not a trend. What is the word I'm looking for? Trend is the only word that's coming to mind. That's not the word that I'm looking for, but my brain is broken. So let's talk about the way that this impacts adolescent and teenage boys and young men. Because first of all, there are clear parallels between like alpha culture and a very obvious disgust and disdain for vulnerability and femininity. And the thing is that Manosphere content creators who indoctrinate these children often indoctrinate them to not just hate women, but also to feel ashamed of themselves, of mental illness, of the idea of weakness, especially the idea of like seeking help or needing help, that is inherently wrong and shameful. And especially the idea of like seeking mental health treatment. They'll claim things like that depression doesn't exist. And they call men, women, bitches, weak, beta, if they exhibit any emotion besides anger. So that profoundly negatively impacts their mental health. This makes these men disproportionately less likely to seek treatment for mental illness, but also disproportionately more likely to suffer from violence towards oneself, harm towards oneself, and also to struggle with mental illness, depression, anxiety, self-esteem deficits for a longer duration of time. Research in the US also shows that there has been a huge spike in depression amongst teen and adolescent girls, and there has also been a huge spike for teen and adolescent girls in the amount of sexual violence that they're experiencing. So we're watching these two trends spike at the same time, which doesn't seem like a fucking coincidence to me. Again, we don't necessarily have causal research to demonstrate that those two things are related to one another, but it doesn't take a fucking genius to see that those two spikes happening at the same time seems like they might have something to fucking do with each other. The other thing about this that is really concerning, because again, when we're young and we're developing our sense of identity and the world and relationships and how do we fit in the world and what's normal, what's an okay thing to accept, being exposed to sexual violence, bullying from peers, being exposed to sex-related discrimination, misogyny, discrimination, all of those things impact the way that we function as adults. And so when we're exposed to those things, it normalizes the experience of violence, abuse, either mental, physical, sexual, spiritual, etc., and also discrimination, just like generally being treated like shit in our relationship. So it normalizes the phenomenon of domestic violence, and these people are much more likely to experience intimate partner violence as adults, but also to not understand that that's what they're experiencing, and thus be put in more danger by not understanding that this is something that they don't have to put up with, or that this is something that's not okay. I also want to show you this quote from research that I looked at for this video because I think they put it better than I do, but it's alarming. The extent to which male pupils within a school engage with the manosphere predicts the extent to which female teachers within the school report depressive symptoms and harmful work-related stress. No such correlation was found with male teachers. Across the board, we are seeing a rise in this type of extremism that also, across the board, correlates with a rise in mental illness, poor quality relationships, and generally just fucking bad vibes. Straight up not having a good time for everybody, but especially for the folks who are victim of this behavior. That's the scary thing, is that for teachers, they're literally held hostage. What are they going to do? They can't leave. It's not even a situation where a parent could pull a child out of a school and take them to a new one, which that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to get better either, because this is happening like across the United States, not just in a particular school. But for teachers especially, this is their job. They're literally held hostage in this building having to teach these students who say and do and think and feel awful and abusive and hateful and violent things towards their teachers. So obviously this is concerning, right? I think it's important. We need to talk about this. And I recognize that there is a level of fear and hopelessness in this. And I wanted to talk about like what we can do to improve this or make this better or survive this, right? And first of all, the thing that I want to say loud and clear, if you are a parent, please hear me when I say that we need to talk about this. I know that it's uncomfortable. I know that that's really scary. But if you don't want Andrew Tate radicalizing your child, then we need to talk about this. It is also very important if you are the parent of a child who is potentially going to be a victim of this type of content and this behavior, then we need to talk about it with those children as well and empower them to understand that, first of all, this sucks. This is not okay. This is something that we need you to be vocal about, and that you as a parent need to be clear that they are safe to speak up about it with you, that you will have their back, that you will go to bat for them, and you will support them if they're experiencing these types of things at school. It is so incredibly important that generally parents are able and willing to have this conversation with their children and be very clear about the harm of these types of content. But there is a particular way that we want to do this, right? One of the things that Laura Bates talks about in her book is that, first of all, we need to familiarize ourselves with this landscape, especially for folks who are not particularly well-versed in the internet or the way that the internet works for younger folks. We need to understand what's happening and how it's happening so that we can better intervene, right? Obviously, I think like millennial parents are probably more equipped to do this, but even for people who say like, I don't use TikTok, right? I don't get TikTok. I don't want to know how TikTok works. You might want to. You might want to familiarize yourself with how that works, how adept that algorithm is at feeding content, especially apparently, according to the research, we are seeing that this type of content is, your children are pretty easily exposed to this type of content on certain platforms. And so we need to get familiar with that, and we need to then be able to have conversations with our children about it from an educated point of view. The other thing that I want to encourage people to remember, not just parents, but everybody, is that this is not a potential feared thing that could happen one day. This is a thing that is very much happening now. It is happening. And so we need to get serious about talking about it and also about critically examining our own biases, our own deeply rooted beliefs about these things, and be able to intervene when we have the option to, the chance to, because that's the other thing. This is not an issue that should fall in the laps of parents alone, right? But people who are trusted family and friends, right? Like godparents, mentors, elders, aunts, uncles, grandparents, older siblings, teachers, babysitters, whoever, those people might have an opportunity to intervene or to offer some challenge to these beliefs. And if we're able to, we want to be doing that in a way that is actually effective. We talked about this in the QAnon video. I'm telling you, if you haven't watched it, go watch the QAnon video. Every single political video that we make on this channel, we reference the QAnon video, and it's because it has excellent foundational research about how to help people who are on the fringes of extremist and radicalized beliefs. One of the things that is so very important is that we don't shame or judge or mock people who have fallen victim to alt-right pipelines. When we do that, what we end up inadvertently doing is shoving somebody further down the pipeline. If you want to pull somebody back from the precipice, we need to be willing to suspend our own judgment and beliefs, and also potentially our own fear and shame if you're like a parent or an elder, in feeling like, fuck, how did my kid, friend, family member end up in this place? Be willing to suspend all of that and offer a safe place for your loved one to air out their doubts and concerns, right? Air out their shame or fear or guilt about saying something shitty to a peer and realizing how much that hurt them. Instead of saying, yeah, you fucking idiot, why would you do that? Offer them a place to be like, yeah, that sounds like really scary. Talk to me. What happened, right? What did you feel? What did you notice? Obviously in your own vernacular, you get it. I'm a therapist. I can't not talk like a therapist, but you get the point that I'm making here. It can also be a very effective vehicle to take, like, essentially, they call it like the inoculating approach in the research, which is that we expose young-ish people, right? Don't expose small children to this, but young-ish people to a very, very watered down version of this misogyny, and then ask them to generate counter arguments to this belief, right? Why is this flawed? Why does that not work, right? Have these conversations with people so that when they are exposed to more radicalized beliefs, more extreme beliefs, they have some prior experience in recognizing the flaws with this logic, in recognizing why this sucks or why this is bad or why this is problematic. Above all else, the thing that is going to be helpful, especially when we talk about pipelines, radicalization, is the encouragement of critical thinking, right? Our brains often seek a simple solution to a complex problem. And so when we have some field time in exercising critical thinking and challenging that sort of survival impulse, it's going to generally correlate with a more complex and nuanced view of the world around us, and especially when we talk about being exposed to, again, radicalized beliefs, extremism, etc., etc. So if you guys have questions, let me know. I can answer them to the best of my ability in the comments, but we do also have a really banging community here also. The people here who share space with us are lovely human beings, which, by the way, if you want to join our Discord community, you can join our Patreon and or channel memberships at the $5 and above level to get access to that and a whole bunch of other things. Come hang out with us because we're lovely. But if you want to leave me your questions, if you have thoughts, put those in the comments. Be nice to each other. And if you like the video, you can subscribe to the channel. We do stuff like this and like lighter pop culture things that I'd love to have you stay for. And then you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye. Big, fat, fucking, queer, pink-haired, feminist weirdo.